large file or something? Is that normal? That's about what you get when you do it. Sometimes 250 megs. I don't know how those images use a bunch of those. Okay, cool. They did do that.
Yeah. Well, what's funny is it was funny because oh man, I gotta get this figured out, and it was like something about kind of like the same thing. Awesome. I mean, I like the artist in it quite a bit. My students really dug the work. We just looked at it this afternoon, and I was like, oh, I always feel like you should keep it short and sweet because it's like, yeah, they should be artists. Yeah. Oh, you know what I mean? In theory, yeah. But yeah, my students really wanted to work with the project, so they did foundations too. So I did the show, and it's like, you've seen the show, and nobody, I just, it opened that. Of course. And I was like, okay. And they totally dug it. They were like, the whole thing's collage, right? So it was really great, very timely. So that's the goal. That's good. Yeah.
Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first lecture of the spring 2022 semester of our Visiting Artists Lecture Series. My name is Dylan Collins, and along with Professor Shalia Marsh, we coordinate the Visiting Artist programming for the School of Art and Design. So thanks for everybody for coming out. Just a few kind of housekeeping announcements. Everybody remember to please, those of you who are here in the audience, silence your phones while we're having the lecture. Immediately following David Menard's lecture this evening, probably around 6 p.m. or so, there will be an opening reception in the CAC lobby with light refreshments. So please come join us after this awesome, what I'm hoping will be an awesome talk. No pressure, Dave. Come after this talk and come see Dave's fabulous show. The other thing, too, I would say is our virtual audience, those of you watching on YouTube, you can put questions in the chat and we will follow up afterwards to answer your questions. The last thing I wanted to mention is our next lecture of the Visiting Artist Lecture Series will be on Thursday, February 17th. That will be Rick Landesberg, graphic designer from Pittsburgh. So we're very excited to welcome him. So please come join us again in a couple weeks. So it's my pleasure to introduce David Menard. He was born in 1967 in Boston, Massachusetts. He currently lives in Rockford, Illinois. David received his BFA from the Kansas City Art Institute and his MFA from the University of Wisconsin. He has worked as a pressman for some of the best print shops in the Midwest. Menard is currently an associate professor of art at Rockford University. So please join me in welcoming David Menard.
Hello. Thank you, everyone, for having me. Shalaya and Jason and Dylan and Joe, thank you for bringing me in. Exciting to be here, exciting to be a visiting artist amidst a global pandemic. It sure is interesting. Coming here today and being here for the last few days, knowing I was going to speak to a group of students at an art school, this talk is sort of fashioned for that. Normally I would look at you and engage you and walk around and do all that, but I'm going to be hitting the button because this talk is image-centric. It's full of images, and I'm going to, sort of walk you through it. And the story is just, what I put together here is sort of my run from undergraduate on through, and not that that's terribly exciting, but I think it's interesting. When I was a student and I heard people speak, I always sort of wanted to know, not only the whys of maybe what they were making, but sort of the hows of how they did it. And so this is kind of the story of how I've sort of made my life as a printmaker. And the first thing I usually start with is, the first kind of influence that I had, and of course it would be something like this. I'm a child of the 70s, and being exposed to a thing like this. Now, I think Kiss is a terrible band, but the image and the shock value of what they represent really spoke to me as a kid. So one of my first and biggest influences would be kind of a rock and roll youth culture, kind of counterculture. My parents hated it, so I loved it. And I think in a lot of ways, printmaking sort of became that. But being, it was kind of the first subculture, the first kinds of things where I realized maybe life could be different from the path that my parents had chosen, right? They didn't go that way. So as a kid, I was into art and I could draw. I liked to draw. But then I got exposed very early on to wood engraving and the prints of Rockwell Kent. And my mom used to take me to the library, and I didn't know how to find the books as a kid, but I just memorized where they were. And I would return to this book again and again before I realized that it was, a wood engraving and a print and a really finely executed one. So that was an influence. And then in the 80s, there was also people like Keith Haring, and I was really influenced by both worlds, the very traditional kind of printmaking and the very non-traditional kind of street art kind of youth vibe, right? So those things led me to the Kansas City Art Institute, which was a great school, a very competitive and fun, kind of hardworking kind of environment. And when I got there, I really started to dig in and was really turned on by prints like this, right? Kathy Kolowitz, the kinds of, and Joe and I we talked about it in the chat we had with this class. This to me is the purest blend between true drawing and printmaking, and just the direct relationship between the artist's hand and the matrix, and then what can happen, the magic that can happen from that. So those were super influential to me. And then Leonard Baskin on the left and George Gross on the right, of course. Leonard Baskin, Hydrogen Man being a life-size figure, that's about a 6-foot tall figure. And then George Gross and his, socio-political commentary, super influential. It's kind of a tradition that I just sort of sank my teeth into right away. I seem to really be drawn to that kind of work. Here's a self-portrait I did. I was into this German expressionists, and so that's Erich Heckel on the right, and then Erich Heckel on the left, and me on the right. And what I always point out is that is a mullet. That is my self-portrait with a raging mullet right there, and that gives you a sense of time and place. But that was the kind of stuff I was into, even right down to matching the hand gesture of Erich Heckel. And then I put my gouge in my hand there to sort of show that. And then I took my wood carving and my drawing and I took it to the live model, drawing from a live model. And then, began to work more metaphorically and work with ideas, based on things that I had read or things that I had imagined, and allowed myself to sort of not drift away, but to go away from that kind of observe kind of work. As a student, there was a competition in my senior year for Canady Outdoor Billboard Company, and they came up with a slogan and it was "Turn Your Mind Inside Out," and they let the students rip with that. And that was my idea for Turn Your Mind Inside Out. And of course, I won the grand prize and got a billboard on I-70 there outside of Kansas City with the image on there. My parents thought I had finally arrived and become a rich, famous artist, and it didn't really work out like that. I remember I got $700 for the prize for winning that, and I blew half of it on a CD player for my car, and my parents were really pissed about that. So that was, but that for me, it was a really positive undergraduate experience. And I kind of bounced around afterwards, and I ended up at the University of Wisconsin, and there's the University of Wisconsin. And when I got there, I really started to get turned on to the idea of people like Rauschenberg here, screen printing. And when I talk about this and when I show this to my students, the thing that I respond to is the kind of the smashing together, the literal smashing together of what I would consider high and low aspects of art making, the high art aspects of abstract mark making and the low aspects of the back of the New York Times sports page. And they're, here they are slammed together in the same image. And to this day, I still find that really exciting and interesting and fertile territory to be able to move around in. But I got turned on to that as a student. And then, of course, Warhol. And, Warhol it's almost a cliche, but I was so thrilled. I've been using the Maryland image for a long time, and then at Art Chicago a few years ago, there was a photograph of Andy holding the film, and I photographed it with my phone, of course, and now I was able to put it together in the lecture. But that grand scale and the photo capabilities and the idea of anything goes in the background and then the black key really ties it all together, that's all really evident in that kind of work, and that really also struck a chord with me. I didn't really develop it or begin to use it till later. At the time I was making these etchings, on the left you see the first state of the plate, and on the right you see the last state of the plate. There's about 18 steps in between, and of course over the years I don't show those. I show the beginning and the end because I think the middle is somewhat less interesting. But you can see that from the left was the plate, and by the time I got to the right, the edges are gone, it's been cut out, it's been eaten up and eaten away, and the drawing has changed. So it became kind of a sequential etching. I'd work on it and then change it and then work on it and then change it and build on that. At the same time, I was looking at, on the left, Polish posters, right? Polish film posters. And so the Polish graphic art and the graphic design of the 20th century is really some beautiful work. And I had responded to it. I had a friend who had a bunch of these posters and were able to get me some, and I really studied them. And then my litho on the right is a constructed figure using parts and pieces and letter forms and things like that, loosely based on the things I was looking at in those Polish film posters. At the time, I also began to work digitally and use Photoshop. In those days, it was still somewhat early, and I spent a lot of time. What I really liked about it is I could work all day in the studio, and then I could go home to my apartment and get a bowl of cereal, and I could just sit in front of Photoshop until for another 3 hours without actually having to be in the lab. And I got real aggressive with my use of the scanner and things that I could do that way. Take the lid of the scanner off and put a piece of plexiglass down and be able to use fluid or funky materials and then scan through that piece of plexiglass and then lift it off. So it was, that became a real aggressive way for me to work. Along that time, I began printing at Tandem Press as a student, and in this photograph, I'm the one with the red hat there. And then so it's you have the two master printers. The one that you can't see is Bruce. The one in the white T-shirt is Andy, and then the back of the head that you can't see is my buddy Terry, and then the figure there is David Lynch, the filmmaker. And I love showing this slide. It's a very awesome time in my life. We were graduate students, and they called us and said, hey, come in on Tuesday, don't say anything to anybody, just come in, we're gonna work. And this was over at Christmas break. It was 1998 Christmas break. And when we got there, they told us David Lynch was coming, and we were awful excited about that. And so we made those prints, and there you see, you know, on the left is us pulling the print, on the right is us taking it over there to the wall. And I used to think that I was chosen because of my chops and my talent and my hand skills, and I realized I was just as tall as Bruce, and so I could hold the paper too, and that's really why they brought me in. One thing over the years as I noticed this, I'm using two hands. That shows you the lack of confidence that I had. You can see Bruce is just holding it, no big deal. I'm holding it like this is David Lynch's paper. I don't want to drop it, right? But that experience was really a fantastic thing, and it led to all kinds of things that came later, even if I couldn't see it at the time. But being a printer and being you know, as we said in the introduction, a pressman, I don't like to use the term master printer. Where in the shops that I came up in, there was a master printer, and I worked for him. I was not him, right? So, but knowing that my skill set that I was developing as a student would actually pay dividends down the line was awesome. To know that it wasn't just, you know, I could use these skills in other ways. Around that same time, I got turned on to these guys. On the top is Don Ed Hardy, the very famous tattooer, maybe the father of American tattooing, if Sailor Jerry's the grandfather of it. And then below is Bud Shark, and Bud Shark is a Madison graduate. He's a printmaker, a Madison graduate, and he prints for some awesome artists, Shigoya and Red Grooms and all kinds of different people, and then Don Ed Hardy. And on the right is Don Ed Hardy's image, right? So it's a litho based on Flash and based on his work. What people don't normally know about Don Ed Hardy is that he got his degree in printmaking in 1967 before he became, you know, known as a tattoo master. So, but the idea that a Madison graduate, a Madison printmaker could make it to the point where he was making this kind of work for these kinds of people who I thought were really, really cool, was also very exciting and very influential. I started to get tattooed at that time. Eventually I did tattoo for a while. And so it was a really important part for me to blend that kind of culture in with printmaking and realize that it could all be part of the same, you know, practice. And then, you know, at that same time I got married, but we eloped, so I used this as my wedding photo because we don't have a picture of our wedding. And I moved to Chicago, right? And then when I moved to Chicago, I went to work for a guy named Tony Fitzpatrick. And he's a big-time artist, and he's there, and he's a big personality. And I mean, I was older. I was maybe 30-something when I went to him. And I just introduced myself to him, told him I had a degree in printmaking, that I was looking for work, and that I had moved back to Chicago. And he hired me on the spot. And I made some prints with these two prints with him. Actually, I made more, but these two. On the left is a multicolor plate. It's maybe a 4 or 5. It's like a 5-color etching, right? Pretty small, maybe 5 by 7 or something like that. And then on the right is called Monument to a Standing New Yorker. And we were together on 9/11 when that happened. And then I remember he said, hey man, go down and get me a plate. I want to draw while we watch the news. And I thought, this is really weird. Who can do this? Who can make art and watch this thing unfold on TV? And then I sat there and watched him do it, and I thought, wow, he can do it. And that's a monument to a standing New Yorker. That's supposed to be a, you know, someone who has survived the terrible events of the day. And so working with him was great. I was, you know, making prints. I was an artist assistant. There was times when I would be printing. There's times when he would send me on errands. And one of the errands, a lot of times I would go to this place called Landfall Press, and I would walk in there, and Landfall is a legendary place if you've never heard of it, but you've got, on the left, you've got Jack Lemmon, and on the right, Steve Campbell. And they have been making prints in Chicago since the 70s, right? And I walked in there on an errand for Tony, and I was like, holy cow, this place is unbelievable. You can see along the top of the photo is Jack's beer can collection. And that's something you don't often see like in a college print shop, right? And so the thing to take away from this is that this is his print shop. It's not affiliated with any school, with any other outside. It's his shop. And it survives completely on the publishing of the prints that he makes. So you got to choose wisely, right? So I walked in there and I looked around and I really wanted to be in there. So it wasn't very long before they said, hey, you know, we want the big guy to come work with us. And so the way I have this set up is there they are throwing the roller, and then pretty soon, you know, there I am throwing the roller. So, and that roller is affectionately called the water heater. because it's the size of a water heater. It is hollow, thank God. But yeah, we would throw that about 300 times a day. I did the math one time, and it's about 300 times a day, more than that maybe. And the art of that is really just working in concert with the other printer. And this is really where, after all the years in school and even the years as a printer, this is where I really perfected the idea of working as a team and working clean and working fast and mistake-free and those kinds of things. Here is so we're inking the plate here, and then you can see pulling the impression there. And you can see that on the plate, the black areas, we're printing black that day, and then you can see on the paper where that black is hitting and how the key really, really helps tie that print together. I put this in here. Here's the print. So it was the summer, and we would have to lay them out in the shop and run the air conditioners all night so that we could come in and print on them the next day without having a lot of rejection from the ink not being set up yet. And when I look at that photo, those were about $10,000 a piece, so there's 50 grand laying there, right? So another thing that you almost sort of never get used to, just the value of the things that you were working on. I have this one in here. This is me printing a Tom Huck at the time, but the noticeable thing is I'm printing it on a litho press, and I can remember asking about that, like, really, this is what you want me to do? And we made this wooden jig, and we printed it using the downward force of a litho press and a nicely greased timpan to work across that surface, but it ended up printing beautifully. And we would use a bone folder if we had holidays or areas that needed to be improved, but as we peeled them back, they just printed wonderfully. What you'll notice on the wall behind my head, though, is there's a crow. That's a Jim Dine crow. There's a Kara Walker there. There's a Klaus Oldenburg. There's a Roger Brown, a Vernon Fisher. There is a wall of printmaking art history, and they're just staple gun to the wall as printer's proofs. And it was just, that's, for a print geek like me, it was really, really heaven. And then as the things rolled along, then we got to work with people. So then they'd tell you, hey, next, we're going to get Ed Paschke next. And if you don't know Ed Paschke's work, that's what it looks like. Just an absolutely gorgeous painting. They're all oil on canvas, and they're painted in a way that's meant to feel like they're being lit from behind, or like a video screen. His color was, that intense. And so we primed a stone, and we drove it over there, and we delivered it to Ed, and he drew on it for a whole month. And Landfall, in the European tradition, they would close for the month of August. You couldn't get 1 minute off of work no matter what, but then they would close for the whole month of August, and then we'd fire back up in September. They still do it that way. And so Ed drew on the stone for that whole month of August. We came and picked it up in September, and we brought it back to the shop, and here we are processing it. On the left-hand side, Jack is doing something called a triple ink rub-up, which is kind of a dangerous bit. Like he loads a lot of greasy ink into it, and then he quickly removes it. But if you don't know what you're doing, you can really kill the artist's drawing at that moment. So I kind of stay away to the side there and let him do that. But it turned it out, really nice. It came up a little raw, a little rich, but through printing it, you can sort of bring it back. And then we're processing it and getting ready to print. And then here's the impression, of course. Steve using the short leather roller, and then me sponging, and then taking the photographs, as it peels off. When I show people who aren't familiar with lithography this slide, the thing I point out on the right is where the moisture in you're keeping the stone wet so that the image and non-image areas, that relationship maintains. As it dries out, that whole image would take ink if you didn't have it sponged down. In the image on the right, you can see that the paper is taking just that thin film of water right out of the stone, and that area where you can see is lighter is actually dry. So then the sponger must come in and coat that before the next layer of ink comes down. But it's a great image in terms of depicting just how slight film of water it is, and then how quickly you can lose it if you're not paying attention, or if you're not maintaining your balance. So here we're printing it, and then the final image, that was the key that he drew in black, and then we added yellow, green, and red, and there's the final image. And it ended up being, really one of my favorite projects that I worked with. I got to meet Ed when we were doing it. And, sort of the sad part about it is that was Thanksgiving 2004, and he passed away. He died as we were finishing that print. He never even got to sign him. He died as we were in production on that. So I finally got to meet one of my heroes, and I got to know him just for a couple of weeks, and then he was gone. It was really sad. At the end of that, as that was winding down, again, at the sort of the change of the year, they told me, okay, the next artist we're going to work with is Christo. And of course, this is from Paris just in September. And if you're not familiar with Christo, first of all, you should be. And second of all, that's what it looks like. But Christo, it's Christo and Jean-Claude. It's Christo and his wife together. They did projects, for the second half of his career as a single entity, the two of them together. And I was excited to know that we were going to be working with them. Some of the prints they had made with Landfall in the past would be one like this radio flyer wagon, with an object in the wagon, and then the print itself has been cut out, the print itself has been wrapped in fabric and then glued back in, so it's actually a three-dimensional print with fabric and string as the element in there. So I knew that in making this next project, it was going to be involved and it was going to end up super cool like that. So here's an image of Jack and Christo in the 70s, and then on the right is Jack and Christo signing the BAT, the ready to pull, the signing off to run the edition that basically our forgery of his original looks good enough to go into production on it. What I always found really interesting is Jack flew him in from New York to a hotel in Chicago where he met with him with a piece of cardboard and 4 prints, and then they signed off, they had a dinner, and Christo got back on a plane, went back to New York. I mean, they flew him in just for that. I thought, wow, that is really awesome. When I asked him, I used to ask questions all the time, and I said to Jack, how did you ever get Christo? And he said, I called him on the phone. And I said, what? He said, I just called him on the phone, and we started talking, and Christo said, can you do this? I want to do this with yellow and this, and Jack said, sure, I can do it. And he said he hung up the phone, and he thought, how the hell am I going to do that? And then he said he spent a lot of time figuring out how to do it. And that, I'd never really lost that. I always loved that kind of blind confidence that he had in himself, because he always came through. And that was something that, he kind of put that off on me too, just like, you can do it, man. Like, you'll find a way. So for a variety of different reasons, I ended up pulling the last impression of that Christo run. And I said, hey, take a photo of this, because someday someone's not going to believe that I did this. And that's me pulling the last Christo print. We had to raise $400,000 to do the project. So running through these editions and running through those pieces of paper, it was, $500,000 hanging in the balance. There's a lot of pressure that goes with that, I have to say. You want to work mistake-free. You don't want to ruin a bunch of the pieces of paper in your hand. And if you do, you're in a lot of trouble. So talk about like having your chops and trying to get it right and not make a lot of mistakes, right? And so there's the finished piece. The interesting thing about this is that center building, it's in Manhattan, that center building, we cut that out, die cut that out, wrapped it in fabric, and then drew on it, and then with ebony pencil, and then glued them back down into every print. And I thought, well, that's cool. And then until Jack found out that I could kind of draw, and then it was my job. So when you buy that Christo print, you're getting a little Menard, because I drew on that building. I took 5 of those things home every night after work, and I would sit in front of the TV and draw on those things with an ebony pencil and do 5 at a night till we did 200 of them. And so that was a super, super exciting time. I mean, one of the coolest things I ever was involved in. I got to drive the prints out to Christo's studio and go to his place in New York and meet with his staff. And I didn't get up into the upper echelons of his studio, but he has this building that has, I guess, like 6 or 7 floors. And I was just on the 2nd floor there where his offices were. But for an art school, nerd like me, it was a really cool place to be. And as I transitioned out of this, so that was, I did this after I got my MFA. I was printing for a while, but I always really wanted to teach. That was the whole reason I got my MFA. I knew that to be a college professor, you had to have that degree, so that's why I got the degree. I mean, really, that was the only reason. And so I had started to put in for teaching jobs around that time. My work looked like this at the time. I put this up as I think about it because as I was doing this, I was working in that print shop, but I couldn't use any of the facility. So I was working in this world-class printmaking shop, but then I would go home and I would be making these things at my own kitchen table. And I would be screen printing, and then I would step in my shower and wash them out with a toothbrush, and then I'd put them in my truck and take them to the power washer at the car wash, and like whatever it took to get them done. And I was talking about that earlier with some of the students. Like, as I remember it, it was an awesome time. I mean, we were just scrambling. I didn't have any resources, didn't have a lot of money, but we were still finding a way. My wife's also an artist, we just finding a way to continue to make the work, even in our small apartment. I put this slide in here too, because around that same time, Jake and Dinos Chapman had done this project. Joe, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but they bought a whole suite of Goya etchings, and then they hand-painted clown faces on all of the figures in the prints. And I remember people in the print community were talking about how awful it was and how sacrilege it was, and I loved it. I still love it. I think the idea that you could go and have a conversation with Goya by painting on his prints, I think is really outstanding, even if it's ruining a set of old prints. So I ended up getting a teaching job. I moved to Rockford. That's what Rockford looks like. And all my dreams came true, and I got my own print shop. Look at that hunk of junk. Holy cow. When I got there, I'm going to walk over here away from the mic. When I got there, that was broken, the green one was broken, and then that one broke during finals week, right? So all my presses broke, like my first semester there. And so that's what the room looked like when I got there, and then within a year or two, it looked like that. I got rid of those machines. I bought the Griffin, I bought the Takich, I built the tables, I garbage picked the chalkboard, so that's kind of what it looks like now. And all I had to do was remove all the crap that was in the classroom, right? And there's the pile of garbage that I single-handedly grabbed out. So those of you that are looking for those teaching jobs and looking for that great new opportunity, remember, careful what you wish for, I guess is what I would say. And then I put this in here too, just in terms of timing in my life. We had a child, and then that worked out pretty good. So we had another one. And then it was like, oh man, I don't know about that. And so the reason I put all that in is because it had a profound effect on my work, and I didn't realize it at the time. But I started to think about myself as a father, which is really a nightmare scenario. And I started to think about the like Candyland and this idealized sense of what childhood would be like. And because I had a new family and because things were like that and I knew a teaching job, I spent a lot of time at home. And I started to work on a sketchbook at my kitchen table. And this is my own kind of version of Candyland, meets slasher horror movie. But the reason I show this is that this sketchbook became super important to me. I didn't realize it at the time. But I was making these at the kitchen table, turn the page, here's another one. But those sketches and what was happening in that sketchbook, and using masking tape as a drawing element and things like that, things that I'm stealing directly from Christo, right? From those sketchbooks, I ended up making these drawings, and those drawings were kind of based on that childlike, idealized, collage elements. And those drawings led to prints, and this is one of my favorite lithos that I've done. I did it at the University of Louisiana Lafayette with a friend of mine named Brian Kelly, and that print really kind of encapsulates all of that. It's appropriated, but it's hand-drawn. It's collage. It comes from that sketchbook. So for me, it kind of hit on all cylinders. And it was my teaching job in that time in my life that allowed me this time to explore and to sort of do things. I talked about that earlier, too. Because I work in academia and I have this position, I don't have to totally rely on the sale of my work. So if I want to make something really weird and unsellable, I can do that, right? Which is really the basis of my career. So I was making lithos, and then I was making etchings in the same vein. And so as I talk about all this, then that was pretty much where I was at for the first couple of years of my teaching job in Rockford, where I live now. And then a lot of things changed when I met these two dudes. And on the left is Javier Jimenez, and on the right is Greg Lang. And they came I gave a lecture like this at my local museum, and they were waiting for me after, and I thought, man, am I going to get jumped or something at this lecture? What is this? And they walked up, and they were print nerds, and they were like, hey, we make prints, what do you know? And I thought, oh, isn't that cool? And then they said, come by our shop, and you'll see what we're doing. So I went by the shop, and we did a couple of events where we printed live with a DJ, and a lot of folks came through, and we started to talk, and we found out that we had a lot of things in common. We both were, or all three of us were really into Sister Corita Kent, if you don't know who that is. She's a nun that was an art teacher, right? She went to art school before she became a nun. And she was in LA in the late 60s and 70s, and just a super badass. I mean, a pop art nun, right? And there's her. And so we were really into that. And then we you know, the things that were happening at the time, people like Shepherd Ferry making their murals, and the street art of people like Swoon, right? And around that time, we were all aware of Swoon and what she was doing with her woodcuts pasted up on the street and how they become part of the landscape once they're out there on the street. And in that, along that line, she went from being kind of an unknown street artist to being as big as it gets. That's the New Orleans Museum of Fine Art with her installation in the middle. You'll notice it's the same figure as the previous one, right? So, and then all of those things in the middle is paper and hand-cut pattern, and she's really phenomenal. And we were all shared our love of all of these things together. And so I started making prints with them, and we started just kind of do it for fun. And to give you an example, we would have a bunch of prints, and then we would find a thing, like in this case, the Spy versus Spy. And then we would steal Spy versus Spy, and then we would work that into the print. And we'd say, okay, this print has got 10 colors on it, but now we're going to finish it, and we're going to use the Spy versus Spy for the finisher. That's why it's printed in black, making it the key, and then some tone behind it to make it stand out. And that is pretty much the formula for a lot of the things we did moving forward. And that little fun little experiment became more and more serious the more and more we did. We would do installation walls and cluster walls. And then we got invited to show in our local museum, so we built a print fort, we were calling it. And you can see down in the lower right corner there, during the event, we were live printing during the opening. On the left, you can see just what it looks like when there's nobody in the print fort. And then so it was a kind of a fun happening and event in our local museum based around our love of making prints together. It just, and it would grow and grow and grow. So then we got invited to show in London. And we went, okay, well, let's go to London. And we went to London, and we showed at the Somerset House, and you can see in the bottom picture, we were doing live printing there too. And it was packed. It was a graphic arts festival that lasted 11 days. And so we were there for the whole time, and it was just awesome. We made some good money, and we got a lot of exposure. We got published in a printmaking book out of London from Thames and Hudson. And along the way, we started our prints. We made a bunch of Ben Franklins and Abe Lincolns. And then we started to get them up on the street. This is a wheat paste on the streets of Brick Lane. And so we have, along with our normal studio practice, we could constantly make wheat paste, and you can see, you may not be able to tell in this one, but this is on blueprint paper, and blueprint paper sticks with wheat paste really, really good. It takes ink really nice, but then it also really absorbs the wheat paste and sticks down beautifully, like a newsprint, but much stronger. And so we do a lot of that. To me, this is a great example of that. Along that lines, with this collective, we started to make these images, comic abstraction, elements like this. And what I'm showing you here is a little section. That little section is now right there on the top, the pink and yellow dots on the top. So we went and we cut it narrow. But we got commissioned to do the inside of this restaurant in Milwaukee. And I had never done anything like that, but we said, sure, we'll do it. And it was a big hit. So we did the restaurant, and we did the signage too. It's called Merriment Social, and we screen printed on the signage. A friend of ours did the lights, and we did the whole thing. So again, this little project has started to grow and grow and grow. The next thing that came, and every time I would do it, I think, maybe this is my last thing with these guys. I'm not much into total collaboration. I really enjoy making my own work. But every time I try to back off, we'd get another commission or another opportunity, and I can stick around another month or two. And so we got some good money for that. The next one was this, and we had shown at an art fair, and I tell you this on purpose, that we had shown at an art fair, and not a lot of people came through. We were standing in the booth, and not a lot of people came through. We were kind of bummed, but man, all it takes is one, right? So one person came through, and they said, they looked at our work, and they talked to us, and they said, do you do commissions? And we said, well, yeah, sure. And that person left, and we got a call from them later on, and they commissioned us. They said, we want 10 prints in your style, and we want them to revolve around world finance. So you can see the image on the left is me laying in the yellow that you can see in the middle there, behind the Capitol building, and we just took images from all kinds of money and collaged them into these prints. We didn't know, but they ended up going to Price Waterhouse Cooper, which is what I think the third or fourth largest accounting firm in the world. If they would have told us that, we would have charged them a lot more, I have to tell you. But they didn't tell us that. So that's the Chicago offices. They liked what we did, and we ended up doing the Minneapolis offices as well. So the reason I tell you all that is then we took that money and we were able to do things like, there's my truck, right? We found some equipment, and the guy, there was a big commercial screen printing outfit, and they were shutting down, and the guy said, oh, you missed it, it's all gone. And I said, you don't mind if we walk through and look anyway, do you? And he said, no. And when we walked through, we saw the 8-foot by 10-foot screens and the 8-foot by 13-foot exposure unit. And I said, what about that? And he said, man, if you can get it out of here, it's yours. Make me an offer. We bought it for $200. And then I went and got the truck from my college, right, from my little university, and we came and we jacked it up and we put casters on it. We bought heavy-duty casters, and we just rolled it right onto the back of the truck, and it's in our shop. Here it is in the shop. There it is open, right? And we can make 8-foot by 10-foot images. Now I'm never going to quit hanging out with these guys. Oh, my God. So that's our studio. We rent it. The three of us rent it, and we split the costs. And then there's another shot. You can see the big screens, the big exposure unit, right? That's our little washout and exposure area. In the door on the right is the studio. And so we started to make this large-scale work. This work all ended up in another restaurant. I don't have pictures of it, but it ended up in another restaurant in town, and it stayed there up until just recently when they changed the restaurant over. Owners changed, and they just changed the artwork. Actually, somebody privately bought all this artwork, and they're one of my neighbors, actually. The shaking hands, you can see, that came from a postage stamp. We found a postage stamp for the United Nations, and it was that big. And then we were able to take it and blow it up to that scale. And that's really the gist of what we do, the enjoyable part. You can see the piece of wood laying on the table. It's just got layer on top of layer on top of layer of color. And you can't see it, but there is an image in there that's being built up to then have the key come over the top. And what I mean by that is, here's an example on the far left. You can see all of the color masking and the kinds of things we do on the fly. Sometimes it's printing ink, sometimes it's spray paint, whatever. And then you can see that once the black goes down, how it really ties that all together. And that's a fine example of just how we do that. This next image is a memento mori inspiration thing. The image on the left comes from a French version of that. It's this idea that, we're all going to die, and these images have this, don't forget that death is always around the corner, right? Beautiful message for our times. And what I didn't realize is I was looking at that thing on the left. I thought it was a really cool image. And then I had made the collage on the right, and you can see that they correlate. And that wasn't necessarily a conscious decision. I wasn't making that on purpose. I was going for a memento mori, but I didn't realize I was pulling so heavily from the one that I liked. And then on the bottom, you can see how that image would find its way into the Fatherless work and how it would work itself in. We decided we got invited to show at a street art show in New York, and we decided to reuse the house from before, which we had in pieces. You can see it there, something I didn't mention and something that I'll touch on. Quick water break. I had one of my drawing students was a theater tech person. And that theater tech person, she was home for the summer, she was getting ready to move. And I went to her and I said, Tori, I am looking to build this house, but I want to build it so it breaks down and comes apart. And I drew it out on a piece of paper and I said, do you think you can do something like that? She said, yeah. And I said, give me an idea of cost and time and everything like that. And she said, okay. And I got back to her the next day and she said, here, come down to the shop. And she had built it already. I kid you not, that kid was just unbelievable. But you can see it comes apart. In the middle section, you can see the gap. So those all pull up out of the track, and we can fold it down, put it in a truck, and take it wherever you want, pull it out, and set it back up. On the right, you can see my two friends, my two partners, printing at the same time. Two guys on a screen, right? Two up, printing. So it's kind of an all-hands-on-deck mentality. This is what the work looks like when it's all layered up, and this is all on plywood, and it's all on the side of that house. So here it is at the Moniker Art Fair, and then this time we decided to sort of use something that a lot of people do, but we put ultraviolet lights on the inside so that when you stepped into it, it would really look like that. And it got a lot of attention. We got written up, I have it here, we got written up in hyperallergic, right? And a couple other things. But that's what the rest of the booth looked like. So as you went through the house, you got to the back side of the booth, we rented a truck, we brought everything out to New York, we even brought our flat file, we thought we were so cool. And, but there's a sense of what the work looks like. And what the cool thing about it is over the time, we've sold all those. All those are gone now, which is really, you know, kind of a cool thing. We also learned that anything over 5 foot by 5 foot, you have to rent a truck, right? 5 foot by 5 foot won't fit in a standard minivan, which seems to be what we all drive. And so now it's 4 by 6 is about, unless you want to rent a truck, it's got to be less than 5 by 5. Here's what that image looks like. It kind of blew up on Instagram. We were very happy about that. And so while we were there, we got invited by this guy. So we showed with this guy at Art Miami. This is Al Paldrock. He's from Estonia. He's part of this performance troupe called Non Grata. And you can see here they're doing a performance in a town square where they burn a car, right? And those guys were really freaky and weird, and they were fun. And we hung out with them and we showed with them at Art Miami. And I jokingly said, hey, if you guys ever come through Rockford, you know, check us out. And like within a few days, they were in Rockford. They just did a whole tour of the U.S. anyway. So he had a bunch of these really large-scale prints, and then we collaborated on his prints. So the color in the screen print is on top of the photographs from another performance that he had done. And that, we did a few of them, and they ended up being pretty nice, being pretty cool. And it was kind of a fun collaborative effort with this performance troupe from Estonia. And didn't think much about it, but then they invited us to Estonia. So we went, and there's Tallinn, Estonia. It's known as the medieval city of Revel, right? And so parts of it look like that, parts of it look like that. It's certainly the farthest I've ever been away from home. It's close to Finland and, say, St. Petersburg, Russia, right? When I say close, it's on the other side of the world, all the way over there. Very exciting. And so they had us out there, and we weren't even sure what they wanted us to do. So there's Javier, and you can see in the background there's a big double-decker bus with the roof cut off, right, or opened up, and they're dolling up the bus for the performance. And then in the bottom picture is us. We kind of built this print station out of found pallets, and we started to make these prints. We weren't even sure what they were really wanting us to do, and then we realized, you know, okay, and they were making masks, and so we started to embellish the masks, and we started to work, you know, we would help in the performances, we would make these projects, and then on the last night, it was, as the night is falling. The fun thing about this is that top slide, it looks so cool, it's so beautiful, all those colors, the full moon, it was an amazing time. That's the bathrooms. Those are all porta potties in that little, so even, I mean, it's just beautiful, and it's like, those are all porta potties in there. And then the bottom one is the bus as we're staging up to get ready for the night's performances, and it ended up looking like this. It was a parade all around, it was a festival, a music festival, and so this parade went all through the festival. There was fire breathers and, you know, all kinds of things. And then in that on the right, you can see people wearing the masks that we had embellished. And then on this one, my friend Thomas with his mask, and then they got me to actually do it. They were like, come on, dude, you wear the mask. I'm like, I'm not wearing the mask. And what's funny is that, you know, they were all stripping down to do it. And so I just took off my shirt. I was wearing the same pants. My keys were probably still clipped to my belt, you know. But I jumped in the performance too, which was super fun. It's not something I normally do. When it was all said and done, I ended up at this beach in Parnu, that's the Baltic. And they put me in there where their studio was, and they said, okay, make some stuff. And I was like, oh, okay. So there was a lot of pressure to like make some stuff. So I went into this room, and I had brought a bunch of wheat paste with me and some things we had printed on the island. And you can see here, I found some cradled wood, some wood, and I had behind me on the table is the bucket of PVC adhesive, right? And so I just made a bunch of collages on wood, and here's those. And I made them, and then they were really kind of cool and everything, but because I was 5,000 miles away with a backpack, like I left them all there. So all that work that we made is in Estonia is still in Estonia. So what I show in the next slide here is that image, that is an image that I lifted from an engraving that I found in an old bookstore. He's just an English politician from 100 years ago, but I use his face in all sorts of things. There's parts of him, obviously, down in the show here. But the next frame shows that using that same source material in a litho, right? And then the litho ended up looking like that. So I blend between what I'm doing with Fatherless, what I'm doing on my own, what I find for them, what I find for me, what I use, the collage, all of it. It's really become all of the same thing for me, which is why in the showdown there I decided to show a couple of the Fatherless prints, just because it's an extension really now of the things that I do as well. Here's the one in the middle is in the show downstairs, but you can see the Xerox collage, and then how it finds its way into various prints. Those two prints, the more orange one and the more green one, they were just layers and layers of color until I came and printed a latex white flat, and then the black over that latex white flat to make that image jump off the page like that. I think it works really kind of nicely. So as I round the corner here towards the end of what I have here, so that sort of is the path as to where we were. And then last summer, our town, you guys, maybe you experienced it around here, but street art is everywhere now, and all these places, at least around us, they want murals here, they want images there, they kind of think it's cool and hip. And so my town did a whole round of murals a couple of years ago, and we weren't part of it. And I was real pissed about it, because it's like somebody coming into your turf and like graffitiing on your turf and then leaving town. They were a bunch of outsiders, and they didn't, nobody from Rockford was really doing it. So when they came back around, we were ready, and we said, well, we want to do a mural too, and we offered that as one of the designs. And I remember saying to my buddies, like, man, if we get it, can we paint that, And so they picked it, and we painted it. And there's the three of us. You can see how big that is, and just what a challenge it was, and how exciting and fun. I got to be honest with you, I had never done anything like that. And in this picture here, I am painting a 25 by 100 foot mural with a 1-inch brush. So I don't know how smart that is, but you can see that with that brush, like, it was necessary to do that to get that kind of detail. And so there, we had scaffold, we had the ladders, and so one guy working high, one guy working low. The best part about it is that was up on a roof already. So we did it at night, because it was so brutally hot, and so we would work at night with lights, and then because we would take a lift to the roof, we would bring coolers and chairs and radios, and it was like a party every night that we were painting up there, and because we were up off the street. And so it was super fun, and then here's how it turned out. And it turned out really cool. I'm really super happy with it. And what I like so much about it is, it's going to be there. Unless somebody sandblasts over it, that mural should more than likely, outlast me in that town. And that's kind of a cool thing. Now I feel like we've contributed to our own local scene, and, and I feel good about that. So not only, but they picked both of our designs. So we did that one, and then here's a shot of us working at night at location number 2, working on location number 2. And the thing that I want to highlight in this slide is we came up with a piece of masonite, and we used a door hole, saw, and we made holes in that piece of masonite to create the dot pattern, to put the dots, the dots inside the design, and then that's how that ended up like that. And so and what that says is RKFD in sign language, for Rockford. And what's interesting, is some people were really pissed about it. They were like, yeah, that's cool, but you guys aren't deaf. And I was like, well, we're just making an image, We were trying to find a graphic, visual way to say Rockford without saying Rockford. So some people loved it, some people hated it. It's really strange how people respond to things that you do without ever really knowing your intentions. Yeah, and so that leads us right to, to where we are today. It's actually the last slide I have in there. So, but that is one of the last things, other than the show that I just mounted for downstairs here. That project right there is one of the last things that we've done as a group, and now leading us to today. That's what I have. So the reason I put it to you that way is if somebody said to you, like, how have you made it as a printmaker? I don't really know that I have the linear answer. I can show you a bunch of photos that kind of sew it together for you. But I guess what I would say to you guys as students and thinking about it is you find a way to keep going all the time. I've had many opportunities to stop and do something else. Well, maybe not do something else, but just stop, and I never do. Jason and I have talked about it. One of the things, it's kind of, if you never stop, eventually you're going to get there, right? And that would be, what I sort of feel is what has happened for me. I built a certain skill set, but then I found a way to use it in a variety of ways. I thought that would be an interesting thing to share with people who are still in art school. I would say that, you know, I teach in a small liberal arts college. It's not really an art school, but being in a school like this where so many people are dedicated to art, I think is really exciting. One thing I want to say about that is where I'm at, and maybe you guys are experiencing it too, maybe not here at this school, but I'm seeing as much as people love this stuff, I'm also seeing like the creative experience completely marginalized in all kinds of ways where people want to discount it and they don't give it a lot of, you know, credence until somebody wants a mural, then they think it's, you know. So it's fun to be in a place like this where, you know, everybody is into it and no one needs to be convinced that art is important. You're just trying to find a way to make each other better and rise up and, you know, raise up your abilities. That doesn't happen everywhere. You know, I think that when you find a spot that it works like that, you know, both my graduate program and my undergraduate program, that community that was around those places is really what I thrived on. Even though so much of what I do is an individual kind of practice, I thrive on being in that community of like-minded individuals. It's like when you find your tribe, you know, and you don't have to struggle so much to explain yourself or to fit in. You just go for it. And I think that's the kind of thing that you guys can have in an environment like this. So, should I take some questions? Is that what I should do now? Any questions? Oh, thank God. Okay.
Well, we do have a Dave's exhibition upstairs if people want to go upstairs.
It's upstairs. I can
do that.
Woo! So is that what we do next, is go to the gallery?
Yeah, I did.